We have just talked about the law of marginal utility. Remember that it is the law that explains the value of economic goods. Well, from the standpoint of the individual actor, the other essential law we're going to present now, and which, when the time comes, will help us understand the market process with respect to capital goods, is the law of diminishing marginal returns, or productivity. Notice that in economics we are increasingly going to add on the term marginal, or in the margin. In fact, Austrian economics is also called subjectivist economics, or marginalist economics. We will be discovering together that it is curiously the last actors, the least involved, the last valuations that determine the value of all. It's marvelous and surprising, but it's true. Well, today I'm going to explain the law of diminishing marginal productivity. There are optimal proportions in which to use the factors of production, or higher-order economic goods, to produce what we called first-order economic goods, or consumer goods, those that directly satisfy human needs. I don't like to use graphs, and in fact, I explain economics without using graphs, but occasionally during the year, I make an exception and use one, and I'm going to do that today. I'm going to use a graph and explain the law of diminishing marginal returns or productivity with regard to two factors of production. Since the law tells us there are optimal combinations of productive factors for producing a consumer good, we will suppose there are two factors of production. We'll call one factor of production A, and we'll call the other factor of production B. We'll limit ourselves to two factors to keep the explanation simple. So you can visualize it, we could make factor of production A a natural resource, a plot of land, for example, or a capital good, and then we can study the factors in greater detail. Let's suppose it's a plot of land, and let's suppose, in keeping with the way most economic textbooks present this problem, that factor of production B is the factor the books call labor. There is no such thing as a labor factor. This is a clumsy and extremely misleading simplification. There is no production good that is labor. There is actually an almost infinite array of different factors of production, different types of work. There are workers specialized in teaching. There are managers. There are people who have earned an MBA in the United States or at INSEAD. There are middle managers. There are first, second and third level specialists. There are formwork operators. There are thousands and thousands of factors of production, different jobs. But to keep it simple, we will imagine the labor factor as homogeneous, uniform, the same throughout. And we will suppose that one of our factors is a fixed factor in the sense that its quantity, the quantity available to the acting entrepreneur, does not increase. It is given. So, let's say factor A is the fixed factor, and so we can visualize it, let's say the fixed factor is a plot of land that is going to be farmed. It could be the size of this classroom, for instance. And let's imagine factor B is the variable factor, in the sense that there are a variable number of units available to the actor, the entrepreneur. To put it another way, he or she can employ more or fewer units of that labor factor. A law firm can hire more or fewer lawyers. If I have a car factory, I can hire more or less labor to work on the assembly line. Well, if we suppose factor of production A, the plot of land the size of this rectangular classroom is fixed, what will happen if we start to increase the number of units of the complementary factor? In this case, the labor factor, specifically farmers.
concretamente a agricultores.
We have the plot of land, and we decide, as entrepreneurs, to employ the first unit of variable factor B, of labor, of work, and this might be one worker or an hour of farm labor provided by a farmer who starts working on this plot of land. Since it's a variable factor, the entrepreneur can say, well, I'm not going to hire just one worker, I'm going to hire 2 workers. And why only 2? Actually, even 3 people could work on this plot if it's a vegetable garden. What happens to the final output in the form of consumer goods? Let's suppose the production process is going to mature and yield potatoes. We're going to grow potatoes. Well, what the law tells us is that if we have a fixed factor of production, and we gradually increase the number of units of the variable factor, if we have a fixed factor of production, the plot of land, and we increase the number of workers who farm it, the law tells us that as we increase the number of units of the variable factor, the number of workers, our output of final consumer goods, potatoes, initially rises more than proportionally. One lone worker on that plot doesn't get much done, but as soon as there are 2, the final output of potatoes more than doubles. And if there are 3 workers, it more than triples. This happens for a certain number of additional units of the variable factor. But according to the law, there comes a point when, though the use of additional factor units does result in an increase in the final output of the consumer good, potatoes in our example, it begins to result in a less than proportional increase. On the graph, we see that, though output continues to rise, at some point it begins to rise less than proportionally. To put it another way, each additional unit of the labor factor, variable factor B in our example, results in a smaller additional quantity of consumer goods, potatoes in our example. And that's what the law says. In any production process you can think of, if we suppose there is a fixed factor, the use of additional variable factor units will always, at some point, begin to trigger a smaller rise in additional productivity, in the form of final consumer goods. And that is what is called diminishing marginal productivity. That's why the law is called the law of diminishing marginal returns or productivity. In terms of the graph, when the curve changes from concave to convex, from that point on, from that number of variable factor units, output increases, but it begins to increase less than proportionally. In fact, it would even be conceivable. Imagine the plot is like this room, and we've already hired 50 workers. We start to send in workers, and they get in each other's way, and we send in 100. Hey, 100 of us don't fit in here. It would even be conceivable for the final output of potatoes to suffer and even begin to decrease if we continue sending in people.